Hello and welcome to 5.3 Lab 1. We're continuing on with our loops, but this one we're going to throw a little bit of a curveball in there because what we're going to do is we're going to start getting into more, dipping our toes so to speak, into more modularization of our code, more object-oriented principles, pulling functions apart, trying to maintain what's called SRP, single responsibility principle. In object-oriented programming, SRP, single responsibility principle, means a function or method has one purpose for existence and one only. You don't have a method or a function doing a ton of different things. Usually it only does one thing, so you can modularize and piece your code together easier. So let's go ahead and dive right in. You're going to need to fill out your student section, open 5.3 Lab 1 JS, and at the top there's going to be a function that's called 53_1 part 1. This is a two-parter lab. We're going to create a new function at the very top of our file, and we're going to call it output message. Okay, we're going to add a comment there. So I went to mine and I created function output message. Then in that new function we're going to put hi from a function followed by a break tag. You know, you could put a \n or whatever, but I put document.write hi from a function. So when we call this function output message from wherever we call it, remember I've said this before, but functions return back to where they were called from. So when we call this function, it's going to output hi from a function with a break tag. So it's going to output that line from wherever we call it. So then in our lab 53_1 part 1, we're going to call that function several times to get this output. So as you can see here, I called output message 4 times. Don't forget your semicolons at the end, by the way. So I called output message, and so 4 times it's going to run this function and output hi from a function with a break tag. That's why we get the 4 lines, hi from a function. Now, I know this is within the loops, and this particular lab doesn't have any loops in it. So you may think, well, that's kind of weird. Why would we have this information in a loops lesson when we don't have any loops? Here's why. I'm trying to kind of separate some things here, so hopefully the concepts are easier to grab. A lot of times when we are hitting some functions, modularized functions such as output message that does one thing, spits out that line, sometimes we may have to do that in a loop. And we may have to output that or grab that and run that function several times. This, while it works, is inefficient. So what we would normally do is we'd create a loop. Like in this case, if I want to output it 4 times, I could create a for loop that loops 4 times, and within my loop call output message. But I wanted you to understand how a function like this gets called from somewhere else, so we can begin to split some of our code away, and so we don't have these humongous functions that do tons of different things. So that's part 1. Let's look at part 2, and let's see what it does. Okay, so we're going to create a new function just above part 2 but below part 1 and have a comment, and we're going to give it a name so that it's outputting the full name. Okay, so in mine, let me scroll down a touch, I have this function output full name, and this is going to do a little more than just document right here. Most functions do. So in that function we're going to add 3 variables, first name, middle, and last, and we're going to prompt the user for first name, middle, and last, and then we're going to output that full name with document write with a period, so we're going to use some concatenation after their middle initial, and then we're going to call the function from lab 53_1 part 1. So we're going to output the first half of a greeting, then we're going to call the function, and then we're going to output the end of the greeting, and then we're going to call the function again, but this time not output a greeting before we call it, and then output whatever we want. And so I'm trying to get you to understand how we can call these functions, modularize our code, and call functions and do different things. So here, hello John T. Smith, how are you? Susan G. Hatch has left the building. So let's see how we do this. First off, our output full name function, 3 variables, and first name prompt, middle initial prompt, last name prompt. and we're just document writing it out. This type of stuff you guys have done over and over and over again, so that should be self-explanatory, and we're wrapping it in our output full name function. So see, that's also a reason for modularizing our code, is it makes writing code easier, and it shouldn't be super complex. We can write code that's easy to understand, easy to read if we just piece it together correctly. So now in our lab 5.3_1 part 2, here's how we're doing it. Our document write hello, and then we're outputting our full name, which is what we're going to prompt from the end user. So if my middle initial is A, so if it's going to say hello, Clay A. Hess, and then document write how are you, and then call it again and ask me for my information again, and then it's going to say has left the building. So let's refresh our screen here. So what's my first name? Clay. What's my middle initial? A. What's my last name? Hess. What's my first name? This time I'll put in Joe. What's my middle initial? I'll put in X. And my last name is Schmo. And so here we've got, hello, Clay A. Hess, how are you? Joe X. Schmo has left the building. So as you can see, this allows you, modularization allows you to separate your functionality and be able to write code that's clear, concise, and easier. Could we have put all this in one function? Absolutely. We could have put it on here. But let's think through how that would have occurred, because we got to, we're given instructions to document write hello, ask the user their stuff, so we would have had to take this var information, put it down here. Then we would have had to prompt for that down here, and then we would have had to document write out hello and that information. Then document write out how are you, and then we would have had to do it all over again. So we would have had to duplicate this code, and that's another violation of an OOP principle. There's an OOP principle, DRY, dry, meaning keep yourself dry. That stands for don't repeat yourself. It's the opposite of wet. Dry is the opposite of wet, and wet stands for we enjoy typing. So don't repeat yourself, don't type over and over again. We would have had to do this code twice down here. Instead, we only did it once and then just called the function twice to make it easier to work with. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, let me know, and happy coding.